Behalf of, where I, Dara Kalima, the community poet, chat with folks who will speak on behalf of their respective communities. On this episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with a poet I don't know if that's the community they're representing, but I've been speaking to a poet that I have known for several years now. We've crossed paths a number of times. Super dynamic. I'm not going to say anything more than that. So why don't you tell us your name?
Thomas Fucaloro. Good evening.
Awesome. Hey, Thomas. I don't think I've ever actually tried to say your last name, so I'm going to try it right now. Fucaloro?
Fucaloro.
Fucaloro.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
You can say it however you
No, I'm really big on getting people's names correctly, so it's actually a thing for me. Like, I'm like, no, we got to make sure names are said properly because that's a thing for me. I hate when people get Dara or Dora or a lot of other things, so I try. So that said, what are your pronouns?
He, him.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I am a poet and educator from Staten Island. I do a lot of, I think work. I do a lot of work on the poetry scene, the NYC poetry scene, probably for like the past 10, 15 years, whether it be shows or publishing or just hanging with poets. And I don't know if there's too much else to tell. I teach poetry at Wagner College and composition classes at BMCC, and I work at a nonprofit called Canvas Institute. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything else really to say. I'm a real person, I think.
That's still pretty awesome. It's still pretty awesome. I didn't realize that you were teaching at two different institutions, so that's pretty cool. So then also, what communities do you represent?
So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm gonna go with the pretentious answer of being like, oh, I don't really represent any community. I represent the community of me. With that said, like I don't know how to answer that question.
So what communities are you part of? Let's start there.
Wait. Sorry, I didn't mean to say wait.
Go ahead.
No, there are communities that I do. I don't know if represent, but part of, yes, like, the poetry community. But I don't know much beyond that. I'm an educator. I don't know if I'm part of the educator community. I like, the band, the Melvins. I don't know if I'm part of the, like, I don't know. That's why it sounds so pretentious. I'm not a part of anything, like, I don't know. I think that's the reason why I think that's difficult to answer, because I think, and I don't know about you, I'm like a pinball machine. I hitting all the bells, hitting all of the things. And when I start saying I'm this, I start losing something else in me. And but for the purposes of our discussion, very much the poetry community. I mean, a big part of who I am, and I think what makes me tick and what has saved me, and moments like this, talking to poets, is the poetry community.
So I'm assuming then that's the community in which we're going to be specifically talking about today.
Yes, all about it.
Awesome. So wait, I have to, I'm going to push on this question just a little bit, because I know we had a conversation before this. You weren't born in Staten Island though, were you?
No, I was born in Brooklyn.
Okay.
I lived in Brooklyn, I think, for 4 years, but I don't think I can get away with saying I'm from Brooklyn. Because I lived most of my years. I lived 11 years in Manhattan, in Harlem. But most of my life I've lived in Staten Island. I would say a lot of, whether fortunate or unfortunate, has shaped my values, has been this geographic location, I think.
Okay. All right. So most of your life is Staten Island. That's fair. Yes. Okay. I wonder how long it takes to say, I mean, we don't let anyone just be a New Yorker, right? So I wonder how long it takes to say that you're from Staten Island.
Right. I mean, that's the thing though, too, like Staten Island, you already belong without belonging because the other four boroughs don't see you as part of NYC. They see you as, I don't know, New Jersey. And at times, rightfully so. But like, you know, we are very much a part of NYC, and I think we are a part of its makeup. I think we actually are. I think us as New Yorkers are more similar than we'd like to maybe admit. Um, you know, um, I think about it in terms of politics, and I so don't mean to bring politics into this, but it's not like Staten Island was the only borough to elect Giuliani or that other guy Bloomberg. You know what I mean? Like there are plenty of other, the other boroughs are doing that too. But Staten Island does seem to regale in that, and that's a little disturbing and scary.
No, that's fair. I have to say, and I will admit, when I grew up, I was always going to Long Island. So I'm from the Bronx, for those who don't know this yet. I'm from the Bronx. And so I grew up by always going to Long Island. So for my entire childhood, before like 14, I really thought that the fifth borough was Long Island because I just didn't know. And then I got to high school, and I went to high school in Chelsea, and one of my classmates lived in Staten Island, and that's when I actually found out that it was the fifth borough.
I mean, a lot of people do get Long Island and Staten Island confused. Many I would get it confused too. I think Long Island's just a little bit classier than we are.
Yeah, I mean, classier, elitist, choose your own words.
Yeah.
You were being nicer than I was. And I mean, it depends on what part of Long Island we're talking about. But remember, Long Island was all designed also so that not everyone could get to it. So there's also that part of it. So that said, sorry. So I know you don't like this title, but it's been said not just by me that you're kind of like the ambassador of poetry for Staten Island. And so I see your face getting very red and you're nodding no for those people who are just going to listen to this later. So I know you don't like this title, and I get it. I get that. But like, you are one of the main faces. I think there's more than 5 poets that come from Staten Island. We know this is actually this crazy large poetry community in Staten Island that we don't know, a lot of us outside of the island don't know about.
Right.
I will acknowledge that. There are about 5 that we know about outside of the island.
Right.
And I mean, you're like the largest name we do hear of most frequently.
I would say, we do have a poet laureate, and that's Marguerite Maria Rivas. And I don't know whether Marguerite is done, and there have been plenty of poets here on Staten Island, that have paved the way or have done this work way before I was. Audre Lorde was a Staten Islander. There's been, she wasn't from Staten Island, but like a part of it and part of its rich culture. I do think that, especially some of the work she wrote during that time period. But in regards to Staten Island, and the thing that is interesting for me, my poetry career didn't start in Staten Island. I didn't perform on Staten Island. I was living in the city at the time, and I wasn't, that is where I started. I hit the other 4 boroughs before I ever hit Staten Island. Staten Island took a long time for me to even, I left Staten Island because when I moved from Staten Island, I didn't understand I wasn't understanding myself. I felt very much, especially during that time period, like I'm old. So I'm 45. So when I left Staten Island, that was
old. I'm right behind you, sir. You're not old.
Thank you. But like the late 90s, I want to say, and during that time period, I was just like, I feel like I have different periods of Thomas. So when I was in Staten Island, I was a huge Kiss fan, and I loved Kiss, the makeup and all their songs, and I want to rock and roll all night and sex, drugs, all of that stuff. And um, part of the mentality of Kiss, I think, is a part of Staten Island, at least where I lived. And I'm not trying to paint Staten Island with a brush,
Mm.
although I know I am. But there was something, at least in myself, that I saw like I need to move. Um, um, and also, like, I had some friends who, I don't want to say I was like on this spiritual journey at the time, and like I was saying to myself, oh, like, I took peyote and then I went to this, it wasn't like that, but something I wasn't comfortable here yet.
Mm.
Something didn't, and maybe it was also where I was in Staten Island. Staten Island, there's the North Shore and the South Shore. The North Shore, which is much closer to the city, has a huge artistic community. And I don't think I was maybe testing those waters enough. Either way, the phases of Thomas, I have the Kiss phase of I leave Staten Island, and then when I return, I'm more into, like I said, this band, the Melvins, like heavy music, underground music. Like I had to get away from Staten Island to really learn to love Staten Island again and come
Mm.
back to it. So when you say about me being a face or something of Staten Island, I was lucky because I was exposed to the other four boroughs first.
Okay.
And I was also exposed to the art and styles of those boroughs that really, I think, helped inform me as a performer and writer ever before I stepped foot on Staten Island again. So I think that maybe made me stand out a little more
Mm.
into what you're saying. But I definitely don't think I'm the face of it. And I certainly don't want to be the face. I like being associated with it. It took me a long time to give myself permission to do that. And that's not Staten Island's fault, that something just blocking me. But yeah, that was a really long answer.
No, but I think that's great. And I think there's something, what I'm finding as I learn more about Staten Island poetry community, or the art community, poetry community more so, is that there's something, Staten Island has something that New York in large probably does not have. And it's something that I'm in, outside of the poetry world, outside of the author world, I'm in the nonprofit world. And I watch my friends in the nonprofit world outside of New York, and they're excelling in their careers in a way that I am not here. But there's so many nonprofits in New York that it's harder to climb the ladder in a way that you just can't, like, we can have job security here maybe, but we're not going to climb the ladder the same way because there's not a lack of us in New York. There's somebody else you can hire. So there's no reason to really to push us. Even as you do DEI, there's no reason to put our faces forward the same way where I see my friends who look just like me in other places excelling, getting these higher roles, doing the same exact work, coming from the same organization and affiliation that I'm in, And I think it's what I'm seeing is, like, in New York, generally, there's so many poets, there's so many writers, there's so much of us that, like, there's like a few standout people, but there's so many of us that no one gets to stand out. But because Staten Island is that forgotten borough, y'all are still getting able to stand out in a way that we don't get to stand out on the rest of, as the rest of a community. So I think that's something really beautiful that's happening. They're like, y'all know each other. Y'all are all like lifting each other up and doing some great things and doing, like, I'm seeing y'all and I'm just like, oh, we don't do that in the Bronx. We have some stuff happening in the Bronx, but we don't have that happening in the Bronx. So I think that's something that's really, really amazing that's happening over there. So, and I think the reason why you are somehow associated is because you've been all those other places, so people know you. I know you because I've seen you in Manhattan.
Yeah.
But I know you're from Staten Island. The same thing with most people that I know as Staten Island poets. I didn't go to Staten Island to find them. they were in Manhattan, and it was like, oh, okay, there's that Manhattan person, there's that Staten Island person who's hanging out in Manhattan.
No, and that's great, and that's a great acknowledgement, and it's great that you're seeing that, especially being from the Bronx, and the Bronx having its rich history of um, um, things it does in terms of poetry, and the other boroughs as well. But I'm going to push back against that a little, just because, and I did the hand motion of you, by the way, um, um, because as great as that is, I miss. Like, I was just talking to someone about this the other day. What's great about the other four boroughs is there's always at least a reading happening every day. There's always poets doing, and I'm not saying that's not happening on Staten Island. It's just not, at least in I don't want to say consistent way, because that's not the wording I'm looking for. But there are a lot more opportunities for poets in the other four boroughs than there is. I mean, look at, like, Mahogany Brown has a residency at Lincoln Center. That's effing crazy. Like, that's
Yeah, that's
absolutely crazy.
amazing.
And poets before that, was doing Rich VR, excuse me, was doing stuff like that at Lincoln Center. Like, there are now, those are only two poets, and like you said, it's few and far between because we're a melting pot of poets, but still, who they bring to be a part of that, and to see those things happen, to me is exciting. I just did a show, which is why we had to switch this, and thank you again for switching dates for this, because I got an opportunity to do something with the Broadway Comedy Club. You're not going to have, that doesn't happen as much in terms of Staten Island, that being able to do so much. And that's not putting down Staten Island. It's just there's something, though, about the other boroughs and having that outpouring that people just, the need to constantly want to get together and share words, to me, I find very exciting. And and is something that I would love to see more, that I would like to see happen in Staten Island more. I don't I that's why saying, you're I want a lot of faces, being that thing. I could think of, when you say the Bronx, 10 Bronx poets come to mind. Like when you say that with the other boroughs, and that's not saying that isn't the true of Staten Island, but it's a great community, but it's not a big community. And no, it's not that it's not a big community, but getting a lot of poets in one place, or having multiple things happening at one time with different kinds of poets, I think that also gets, misdiagnosed when it comes out to the poetry scene in Staten Island, because you've got the performance poets, you've got the Dada poets, you've got the I'm a hermit and I'm going to live in my room for the rest of my life poets, who don't go out and perform. So there are those enclaves of poets, but I don't think, I would like to see more of that outpouring, more poetry programming, or more poetry things happening on Staten Island that reflect what the other boroughs are doing. But maybe, to your point, that's something that's exciting about Staten Island too, that it's not necessarily an exact reflection of the other four boroughs.
Yeah, because I think even as you speak about Mahogany Brown, I mean, I don't even know where she's from. It's like, I think she's isn't she from Brooklyn, or is she not? Like,
she lives in Brooklyn, but she's from the West Coast.
Okay, so yeah, so like there's that whole, like, with us, we're jumping everywhere. Like, especially if you got a car, a lot of people are showing up. There's open mic, the Restless open mic now that opened up in Queens, which apparently is great. A barrier for someone who doesn't drive, but a lot of Bronx people who have cars are showing up. Like we're just all jumping places. Not everyone's hopping on the ferry to
Right.
get across to do the next thing. So that's there is that divide. And even me, like there's things in the Bronx I do not go to because it's too far.
Yeah.
And because I live so north in the Bronx that it's easier to just hang out in Manhattan than it is to go to other parts of the Bronx for me. So it's like, is that cab in my budget this time or not? Because that's how far it is.
And
Like,
I know you've been traveling to Staten Island a lot recently. So what do you take the Green Line to the ferry, or?
so I live on the one train. So that's one benefit. But also I work downtown. So I work near the ferry. So I usually are coming right after work on a Friday. And then so it makes it just, or like I will, yeah, I've been downtown near work or at work and then switching over to make it a little bit easier. But yeah, because it's a whole commute. It's a whole commute.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I've been coming over but it's like, but that's what it is amazing to see the community that's there. And I've been honored to like witness and see some of my friends. Like I know some of y'all already from before, but seeing y'all in your natural habitat, whatever that sounds like.
Yeah.
So broader question, not just, Staten Island or whatever, however you want to answer this question, but something beautiful about the poetry community.
In general, or Staten Island, or?
Both and or whichever, however you want to answer that.
I mean, a few different things. I'm gonna say it's not gonna just be one answer. I think the like I said before earlier, Staten Island has shaped so much of who I am and what I am. I think a Staten Island accent is different than the other four boroughs. Yeah, the Brooklyn and Bronx accents are different. But there's definitely that Staten Island twang kind of thing. We, instead of the, we say duh, and things of that nature. But that's what I like. There's Staten Island has an interesting voice and an interesting perspective. They'll definitely, Staten Island will, for good or bad, will make you look at the world for a second. Oh, I never thought of it that way. And it's interesting. You just mentioned the ferry too, and I think that says a lot about Staten Island. Is we're the only borough. You got to take a boat to. If you want to take public transportation or the boat. Like, and there's something interesting in that to me. I think that separates us from the other boroughs, and I think adds to the rich culture of who we are. And adds to the poetry culture of who we are. You can feel that. We're like the ferry. I have a line in a poem that we're like the ferry, we carry us. And I think that is true. But in a broader sense, thinking about something beautiful to say about the poetry, like I've said this a lot. I am someone who is still in recovery. And the poetry community is really what has saved me. When you're in recovery and you look for habits or things that are going to bide your time, and being part of poetry, doing shows, whether doing them or setting them up, publishing poets or being published, or conversations like this, they are all part of that recovery. And that's important. That's a beautiful thing. Maybe it's a self-serving thing, but it's also a thing of healing. And I think what also, not only the structure of it, of and the therapy of it, but the structure of it too, that being able to get out of the house and to be with people, especially if you're an introvert, or I feel like I'm a better poet than I am person. So I think maybe the best of me comes out when I'm with a group of poets than maybe when I'm with a group of people, or a group of friends. So that's something that I cherish, and the people in the community, to see how they're healing or to see their journey. And again, whether it's because you know it, I know it, especially being in New York, you hear poets that you love and you hear poets that piss you the f off, and you need both of them. You need both of them because both will show you how to heal. Because that poet that pisses you the hell off, um, it's not about excluding them, which for a little while, that was the climate in New York. And I was definitely one of those people where, like, you were, excluding people because of maybe some of the things they were saying on stage. I don't want to say censorship, but like just being that, like, um, um, that gatekeeper, that kind of sucks. But anyway, back to what I was just trying to say is that the poetry community has been a necessary community, and it's been a place where I keep going to heal. Open mics are really important, um, and I think sometimes there are levels of poets. I consider myself a mid-level poet, and I'm not. I'm never gonna be part of the chairman of the boards or anything like that. I'm just gonna be in that middle space, and I'm fine with that middle space. I'll go to that open mic. I'll go and be a part of that open mic. I don't need to be the feet. And they're important. I think they're important so much to at least me and my growth, and to your growth as a writer, trying things out, hearing what other people try out. So yeah, those are some of the beautiful things about the scene that I connect to, and that I cherish. Are there things about can I ask you, are there things about the scene that you find beautiful or that you cherish? Or
Before I answer that, can I just tell you, you just shook me with that you're a mid-level poet, because I see you so far
oh no,
above that my hand cannot show up on the screen. And I'm like, if I think myself somewhere in the middle and you see yourself in the middle, then I must be lower than I think I am. And that's scary. Like, I don't know how I feel a little shook now. I'm just like, uh-oh, did I have an inflated ego for a second? Like, I don't know what to do with myself now. You're such a dynamic poet. Like, when you take the stage, you take us on, like, just your whole body language and your whole, you take even, and it's amazing because very few people can do what you do. And I tell people, because I also don't, I don't memorize a lot of my work. I have too many poems to memorize. And you will perform with paper in hand, but you embody this whole energy the moment you start performing. And it is amazing. And you see yourself as mid-level. So then I'm like, good Lord, am I just like an infant? And do I have
well,
to
can I clarify something when I say mid-level? So I don't know how I am in terms of saying my relevance or whether I'm a good poet or a bad poet. I know that I'm a different poet, and I know that really helps. When I say mid-level, though, I also just mean um, I'm never going to make it to Lincoln Center. I'm never going to be in that stratosphere. And I don't know if that's because of skill, if that's because of drive, if that's because of choices that I've decided to make in terms of what's comfortable for me and and again, I'll use quotation marks, poetry career. But I think that's, like I learned long ago not to. I'm not a good networker to try to strive for this thing that like I don't need to. And when I say this next thing, if this sounds elitist or sounds like I have some sort of money, I do not. Like I'm someone who, like, I will read in your backyard for free. Just give me that state. That is something that, thinking about it now, like that's, you know, like thinking about it, I get a little like it sounds cliche, choked up, or I feel that, because that's a big thing, to be able to let that out, and connect with people in that is really something that I need. Maybe it's self-serving. I'm not sure, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with not, yeah, getting, absolutely. Every poet artist deserves to be paid. I would never um, um, say that that is not something that should be true. But there's another thing about this whole thing that I don't think I'll ever be, you know, um, I'm never going to have that drive to be the Instagram poet that gets the book deal because I know how to get followers. Although that kind of poet is a necessary poet because they've learned a different way to break in to the scene and get that money and get that kind of exposure. And that's awesome. I love, a lot of people have issues with poets who break in that way, or they're not going the traditional way. F that. The more you have on there, the more that poets you have in the space, um, you know, the more exciting it is. Now, I will say though, I get a little, I think Ocean Vuong, one of his lines was in, I forgot I forgot what it is, but that kind of shook me a little. So I'm a big Ocean Vuong fan, and to see his line in an ad, but in the same respect, you know, get paid for it. It's poetry to get some sort of income, and for that income to somehow have a comma maybe next in it. You know what I mean? Like, for the written word and not for selling a commercial. And that, I don't mean that towards Ocean. I just mean like, being a commercial writer, or being a real estate agent, get that money. We're in that space of capitalism where nothing is pure. With that said, for me, and mid-level, I think I'll always be there. I won't, if you
Okay.
can't, it's never been, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I feel better now. Now I feel like we're on the same
You're a
page.
fabulous poet. You're an amazing, and I don't think you can say you're in the mid-level. You're definitely not in the middle of the Oreo. You're definitely above the cookie of the Oreo.
I'm still in the, well, but to your definition, I'm with you there too. And I may not perform in your backyard, but it depends on depends on the ask and who. So then the answer may be yes. So
Backyards are awesome. I've done some great backyard shows, like Lightning Bugs are out.
oh, that does sound beautiful.
There are some really, but I've also done some shows in crazy places. Like I did a show at a laundromat. It was a reading.
I did hear about this.
Yeah. Like I don't, that, and I think that's what, being a mid-level poet opens you up to those opportunities to do something in a space you wouldn't normally do that thing, and that that excites me. That's an exciting prospect.
No, I definitely, I hear you. I can co-sign all of that. So I'm with you on that. And I don't want to ignore your question, which was something beautiful about the community to me. And I think it's the same stuff. I think it's I think, the beautiful thing about the community is the healing, is the space for, if, I know in some communities, in some groups, so maybe it's just the community in which I've been able to foster, and not just all of the poetry community, but just the family that comes out of it, like I am genuinely happy to see people when I see them again. Like when I saw you at the New York Poetry Festival last year, I was genuinely happy to be like, yes, there's a face I know at this festival, you know, and even though it was just in passing, and of course at that moment my brain could not bring your name back up, but I was like, yes, I know him and I
Yeah.
know who he is, and I know he's from Staten Island, you know. Like but it was like I was really happy to run into you for those few moments, you know. Like there's poets that, you know, even if I don't really, I'm so introverted and people don't believe it because, you know, COVID, this pandemic has been it's been my like amazing time because I get to be at home. I get to control the conversations in which I have. I get to write. What?
Nice.
Heaven. You know, I was so, like, I'm like, again, I'm not that far behind you because I was like one of the last of the latchkey kids. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know how to take care of myself, you know? So it's been a great time in like that sense of being able to take care of myself and be in my own little introverted world. But it has been, so people don't get that like this is in my zone. But when we're at a poetry event, I get real like, oh, we gonna sit here. I'm gonna pull out my phone, sit here and just do this. Oh, it's my turn to go. Okay, great. And then people really don't think I ever want to be present because I'm full introvert. I don't want to socialize. Not because I don't want to socialize, but I don't want to socialize because I'm an introvert. I'm like, I don't want to do the forced conversation, the fake anything, but I'm genuinely happy to see you there and be present and hear your words and enjoy. And I think like the community that has happened in New York and the poets that you start to see as you started going to those same places, whether before the pandemic or after it, you know, those faces you got used to seeing as you went to those different spots. You're like, oh, showing up to these places too? Word. And there's some places that you got to have that not everyone showed up to, so it got to be your home base. And then there's the places that everyone showed up to, and you got to be like, yo, we in this deep. This is our place, right? Like, and so like I love that sense of like camaraderie and enjoyment, even if you, and like I just love poetry. So I come from a theater background, but I hated performing as an actor. I decided directing was really what I wanted to do, and I don't do I retired from theater for the most part anyway. It has to be the right person asking me to come back at this point for me to go tech or do any of the crew stuff now. But I love the sudden death aspect of poetry, of being on stage, right? So like however you perform the poem today, it ain't gonna be the same tomorrow. However you even rehearsed it right now, it's not the same the next moment because the audience is there, you're nervous or whatever energy is happening. It may be better, it may be worse, but it's do or die. It's now. And so I could have heard that poem 50 million times, but each time it's going to land slightly different. The audience is going to do it a little different. And I could know this poem by heart, and I'm still going to be sitting there at the edge of my seat like, all right, how you going to do it this time? How's it going to land? And like that all of that is so exciting. And so it's just beautiful seeing people grow. Like you said, it's beautiful seeing people heal, have moments, be honest and genuine with whatever they're sharing. It's amazing seeing the craft. Like when I'm sitting in the audience, I'm listening for I'm studying. Like even if I don't look like I'm studying like, what are they doing that I'm not doing? What can I take from them that I can maybe play with? Or what subjects are they using that I'm not even thinking about? You know, like this thing, like I have been having night eating in my head ever since. And I'm like, there's nothing I can do with that, but it's been playing on repeat in my head nonstop since I saw you do that. So like, what do you do? What performative thing am I missing, or what wordplay am I not doing? Or, you know, like I listen to you know Leah V, right? When Leah V?
No, I don't.
You don't know Leah V?
Oh yes, I know.
Yes.
I know exactly. Yeah.
So Leah V, whenever she performs, I go into a zone and I end up writing, and like I've never smoked a daggone thing, no matter what it is in my life. And she has this one poem about smoking weed, and I'm like, yeah, I remember when I was smoking. Like I just all of a sudden I'm like, I'm in this place. I was like, that was like real good. Like I ain't never smoked a thing, but I'm just like in a zone with her. And then she has this poem about like something like an erotic poem. And then I was like, what is she doing in that poem? Why is that poem so amazing? And then I was like, well, what do I know? And I started writing an erotic poem about crocheting because of something she did in her poem. So like the fact that you can learn from other poets just being in their audience, and your stuff may never be that good, but it just gives you permission to like think and learn. And it's a synergy that's happening that is so beautiful about the culture. But anyway.
And just to add to that really quick, it
Yes.
teaches you, in my opinion, empathy. Like everything you're saying, like I'm sure the poem about weed smoking, but then also a poem about a story of hers and a relationship. Like it just teaches you to feel and understand people more. And I think that's a really important skill to have. I think poets, for the most part, are empaths. So, which I think it helps us within our work. But yeah, I wanted to just add to that really quick.
Yeah, and even if we're not empaths, we're definitely observers.
Yeah, observers. Yeah.
We're observing, we're studying, we're watching. I always answer when people ask like, what's the goal of an artist? And I always say we're a reflection of whatever's happening now. So even if we're rejecting what is happening now, that rejection is still a reflection of what is happening now. If we refuse to write about current events, then that is still a reflection of what is happening because we needed to reject that. That's still like we're still telling what is happening at this period of time. So I think it's our responsibility to somehow portray what is going on in some way, shape, or form. But yeah. See, this is the problem with interviewing poets, because then it becomes a whole. Anyway, so
Problem here. It's been great so far.
Is there a unique fact that you can share about the community?
Unique fact that I could share about I don't know, unique. Could you give me an example of a unique fact?
I mean, I could say the one about Audrey Lorde because I actually didn't know.
Oh, okay.
But like I don't know. Like I didn't know until like I was there, and they're like, yeah, it's down the block. That's Audrey Lorde way. And I was like, really? So like anything random, or like I didn't know Baldwin. Is it James Baldwin went to high school in my neighborhood?
Oh, really?
Yeah, like so it's the whole thing, and I was like, really? I didn't know that. There's some random things that like the things we don't know.
Yeah, I can't think of any unique or random facts.
Is there a random fact about like a poet that you like or follow or interested in? Or is there just who's your favorite poet?
I would say that Ocean Vuong thing is a random fact that he has. Is it Christian Dior? Dior? How do you say it? Christian?
Dior. I think it's Dior. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting. I also saw on TV they had a bunch of poets that I knew doing commercials for different heritage months, and I thought that was really interesting. That I don't know if that's a random fact, but I think that poets are invading I don't want to say that, but being a part of invading works too. Our TV sets more is really interesting.
I think it's definitely another it's another season. I think Deaf Poets on Broadway, Deaf Poetry Jam, I think all of that's had a wave of it, and this is like the next wave. A lot of people won't remember Deaf Poetry Jam or Deaf Poets on Broadway, but like I think this is the next wave of that, because you had and like months apart you had Brandon Leak win America's Got Talent, and then you had Amanda Gorman at the inauguration.
I poets in my classes to introduce them. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sorry, continue. Say it again.
No. So the classes I do at Wagner, I start off with those two poets because it's too, not only are the poems and the poets great, it's an accessible environment. Like it's an invite, especially if you're a non-poet and you're like, oh, this is on is it America's Got Talent?
Yep.
Or, you know, you see it on there. That's why the Instagram thing, I love that sort of shit because it's making poetry more accessible. And it doesn't make, I'm not, even though I work in academia, I hate academia because of what it is they want you to show, teach. I use deaf poetry. You know, deaf poetry jam is so great to teach spoken word because you also have hip hop artists doing a cappella on there. So I always but I always try to have my students um, um, learn how to recite lyrics first before a poem because you're
Mm.
dealing with someone else's rhythm. So then you have to incorporate that rhythm into who you are, and then something else comes out. And then when you do your own poem, that's what I love about poetry too, because poetry, like you're like, so there's a band, you're musicians, you've got the bass, the drums, whatever, and you're each doing your thing. But poetry, you're the whole band. You're the bass, you're the drums, you're the lyricist. You know, even thinking about what you were just talking about, like director, actor, like in the theater, you're all of it.
Mm-hmm.
You're making all of the moves. You know, maybe you have an editor. That's about it. But you're making all of the moves, and those kinds of shows and those kinds of environments, I think, are so important for poetry to prosper. Because if you just go the academia route, and that is not to say that there isn't, that poetry of the academia isn't important. It's amazingly important. It's just not the only thing. And I think sometimes teaching poets of 100 years ago, but just always focusing on that timeline and not doing anyone contemporary is, I think, such a misstep when it comes to teaching and sharing work. So yeah, Brandon Leaks, Amanda Gorman, all of that, making poetry so accessible like that, I think is unbelievably important.
So I have a random question for you because it just popped into my head. And I'm having a lot of mixed feelings about something right now. So I'm just going to use this conversation to explore my mixed feelings.
All right.
What is good poetry?
Who? I mean, I think that really depends on the listener or the reader. For me, it starts with, it's got to hit. It's got to hit something emotional. Um, I I like Shakespeare. I read Shakespearean sonnets, and the technicality of it is amazing. I don't know if it hits me um, um, in a way that, let's say, and I know this is a very controversial poet, but in a way, Charles Bukowski hits me, where it's just something really honest. I'm going to give you, you know, although he would disagree with this, I think what excites me about poetry and is such a draw, and what makes really good poetry is you're not always the hero in your poems. And I
Mm.
think that to me is really quality work, when you're not always the one, you know, like you said, we're an observer, but sometimes we are participating too, you know, like um, I I just got out of an 8-year relationship. I think I'm in month 6. If all of my poems are pointing the finger at that person and they're not taking the time to examine myself and my own participation in that unraveling of a relationship, then that's shitty poetry to me. That's
Mm.
not like any, you know, I want to know the poet is learning too. I want to see wordplay. I want to see all of that stuff too. I absolutely, you know, um, um, I would say my first introduction to poetry was really George Carlin, but he's not someone who is talking so much about, you know, unraveling, you know, but like those poets who unravel and who really give you the wound, to me, that's really good poetry. That's really in an effective way. There are people like, with art, there's got to be art involved. It can't just be like, I'm a shitty person, have a nice day. There's got to be some sort of art happening with it, something that, even though you're showing me the wounds, you're showing it to me with this filter on it that I haven't thought about before. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with it, but I then make a decision about how I want to feel about it. And I think that's important. So I guess that's, to me, I mean, no, but not only that. I mean, I love funny poems. I guess poets who can, it's such a hard question. You're giving me such a hard question. It's like a wet sponge. It just keeps coming. I guess also poets who can find their voice, be themselves. One thing that I think I'm lucky about, and you mentioned it before, and I don't often give myself praise, but I will say this, that I, for better or worse, whatever you think about my performance, I get in there. I get in there. I'm in there. I'm definitely know that I'm Thomas and I'm no one else. I mean, I could definitely feel influences like, like you mentioned the night eating poem. When I was writing that, Dennis was in my head, because I know Dennis's poems having to do with M.A. Dennis's poems having to do with relationships, food, and then all of a sudden that just like those brushes of inspiration are amazing, and they're in there, but I know that I'm in there when I'm performing them, and that's what I love to see. And that's why M.A. Dennis is amazing, because he's in there. He's not doing Shakespeare. He's not trying to. There are so many poets who are trying to be that thing, to do that thing. As long as I do what Shakespeare says, or, as long as I follow this formula, I'm a good poet. And that I hate. I absolutely hate. If you're not yourself in your poems, I know a lot of people will disagree with this comment. I hate rhetoric in poetry because it always just sounds the same. It sounds you're hitting the same notes. How can you, you're just hitting the same notes. Now I'm going about what I don't like about poetry, which I know is not the question you asked. So I'm going to reel myself back in. I'm going to stop there. All right.
But no, that's interesting. So, thank you. That's what I'm gonna say. There's more I would say, but that's not for being recorded. So that's what I'm just.
But I also like poets who don't take themselves so seriously either. I think that's important too.
So I will actually give you space to go in the other direction, because one of the other questions is a bit of what frustrates you about the state of the community. And I really I would love for you to speak a little bit more about gatekeeping, because you started talking about it before. And I loved that like, I have a lot of mixed feelings about gatekeeping in different ways. I think, I get the freedom of speech thing. I also, and I get, trying to be PC and or not, and I get trigger warnings, and I get all of the stuff. But I also think some people are just don't need space if they're just trying to be terrible. So I have this mixed feeling about that. Or I don't need to be in the same space as the person who's trying to be terrible. So I've actually decided to avoid some spaces because of some people who show up, and I can't rock with their writing. And so if I know you're supporting that person, I can't be there anymore because it doesn't work for me. But I'm not telling you don't support them. I just choose not to be in the same space, so that's different, But I also know that, like, I found that I've been seeing some gatekeeping in other ways that is very clear, tied to if you don't have an MFA, you're not qualified as a writer, or if you sound too clever, is words I've received, which also really codified for too Black or too angry. That happens. And so I have a lot of interesting feelings about the community as well. So you mentioned gatekeeping, that like I wrote that down as a note. I was like, I want to hear more about your feelings and thoughts about, the community at large, like the frustrations. You don't have to just talk about the gatekeeping, but since you mentioned it as well, I would love for you to circle back to that a little bit as well.
Yeah, gatekeeping and clicks, very much so. And I think
Clicks.
Clicks. And there was a point where I think I was trying to, and that's what I meant before about being a mid-level poet. There was a point where I was touring outside of the, when I was big into slam and the national poetry scene, which imploded on itself because of gatekeeping and clicks. But during the height of, I would say, slam and gatekeeping and stuff like that, there was a lot of things like, there were 3 big slams: the New Eurekan Poets Cafe, Bowery Poetry Club, and Louder Arts, which Louder Arts I was
them.
part of. And
totally forgot about them.
Yeah, and those 2 of those series, Louder Arts and the Bowery Poetry Club, and this is prior to Bowery changing. Bowery Poetry Slam, excuse me. Those 2 slams ended because of gatekeeping, because of clicks, because of people, and I was part of all of that madness. And I brought that to Staten Island, like the slam that we had, having a statement at the beginning: no racism, no sexism, no homophobia, transphobia, fatphobia, body shame, the whole, which I don't think anyone is ever wrong in saying that at the beginning of a show. I don't mean it that way. But I do mean that there were there are times where we just mentioned is poets are healing. You're not going to get it right every time. I could remember there are times where I didn't come into this pure of heart. I came when I started coming to poetry, I was still doing a hell of a lot of coke. I was a huge Bukowski fan. I loved Hunter S. Thompson. I was still, I still had, and not saying I don't have toxic male traits in me now, but I still had that. My first book of poetry, I hate it because it comes from a place, there's misogyny in there, there's ignorance in there. But that came out about 15 years ago. I think I'm a different person. And when I was going into it's interesting, when I was going into those slams, the New Eurekan Bowery Poetry Club, they held me with open arms because they saw someone trying to figure it out. And I also think they recognize something different, maybe that you mentioned too, and I'm not trying to put myself on some sort of pedestal, but they saw a different voice too. And I think, but that isn't always the case for poets. Sometimes someone says some ignorant shit, and it's not because they're trying to offend, it's because they haven't gotten there yet. And they need someone, and I've had some poets talking to me, hey, Thomas, let me talk to you about this thing. And those are important moments. You should never, ever discount those moments when it comes to content. When it comes to what you're talking about, MFA and that kind of shit, that's all bullshit. That's another thing. That's just elitism and people just thinking who they are. I have a diploma, it's an extension of their penis, whatever. But like when it's
I was trying really hard not to laugh. It's like I heard it and I was like starting to laugh and I was like, I'm not gonna laugh, and it was just like I just could not. I'm sorry.
Please do.
It's brilliant. Sorry, continue.
But in terms of content, work, those conversations should be had. And I think when you're having those conversations with poets, they're important because they sit with you. And that's, you know, people talk about workshops and edits. I love edits that are more critique than patting me on the back, because the critiques will sit with you longer. You may not see it in the poem that they're critiquing, but the next time you put pen to page, you're going to have a new lens. And that's so important when it comes to writing. So I think when it comes to the scenes and having those content conversations, they're important. I think there was a point in the poetry scene where that stopped happening. And to me, at the height of PC culture and poetry and slam, that kind of imploded on itself. And 2 slams ended because of that. And now slam and poetry is kind of, in New York City, isn't something that's big. It's not something that's really done. And I think that really hurt the scene. And I think I was part of that implosion, and I will always feel bad about that. And I think that's also, I don't want to, I'm sure there are some poets that you and I might think of that we know do it on purpose. And I don't want to say any names on here, but I know I've dealt with banning them from different readings that I've been a part of. And banning is an interesting thing. I've never banned someone just because of their poems. I banned someone because of, well, the waitress said this. I've seen them steal something. I know the owner has said they think that they're anti-Semitic. I could think of a reading series that's happened to that I think we both go to, or it's in the same location. I don't want to say the name. I don't mind saying the names, but I don't know if you care. But they're in the same location. They happen 2 different places, but they have one of the same poets who's banned one night, but not banned. That poet's not banned at our thing anymore. But there are poets that you need to have them leave their spaces for a little while, because they do seem like they are trying to do something else. And I don't know, I also get concerned when you tell someone not to be in your space for a little while, that the word censorship comes up and freedom of speech. Especially, that poet who can't perform in that bar can fucking go on Zoom, go Facebook Live, and read their poems all over the place and share it to whatever fucking group they can go. I've never understood that argument of, I think censorship is a much bigger thing where you have no voice at all, where you can't, do anything. And I think those things get very conflated. I think sometimes people are just like, you know what, man, maybe you need to sit with yourself and not be in this space for a little while. I don't think there's anything wrong with timeouts. With that said, I think it can get dicey. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen it too. I've seen a lot of ignorant shit, and I'm sure I've, even without even knowing it, have said some ignorant shit, But if you're a series and a host who's trying to open up dialogue first, that's good. And it took me a while to learn that. But if after that dialogue it gets worse and it's perpetuating something that doesn't feel safe, I think you might have to do a timeout. But I think if you do the timeout first without the dialogue, I think that's a problem. So in terms of what you're saying with MFA candidates, people with diploma, that's more of that bullshit, like that's why you'll see so many people in academia, like Rupi Kaur I'm not a huge Rupi Kaur fan. Okay. I'm not, I do think Rupi Kaur I've seen some, actually, I'm not even going to go into that. I'm not a fan of her work. I love that she pisses off academia because she's doing it a different way. She's sharing it a different way. It's blossoming a whole new generation of poets who wouldn't be into poetry. Are they, are they reading The Wasteland, or are they into Walt Whitman? Maybe not. But do they need to be into Walt Whitman to appreciate, to write, to love poetry? I don't think so. And that kind of gatekeeping scares me, that, and listen, I'm someone who has a diploma. My diploma is behind my lightsaber there, my Star Wars. Like, I don't even have it hanging up. I actually, part of me regrets it. But I wouldn't take the experience. I did learn so much, but I also learned like the fucking New York City poetry scene is an MFA program in and of itself. Like you were just saying, you learn so much from other poets. But for me, I want all facets of it. I wanted to learn the academia stuff because I think that it's something that I'm still lacking, and it's something that I am interested in. I do read that, but it's not the only thing. And I think there are so many gatekeepers who make that the only thing. Same thing, there are so many gatekeepers in the slam world where you've got to write a specific poem that's got to land a specific way. That's got to do, yes, topics. I survived it. Again, like you can't be the enemy in your own slam poem, or that's not going to work. It's not going to work. Or not your own enemy, but to really to not be the hero. I think that's again such an important facet. But I can definitely go on and on about cliques and stuff like that. What are some of the cliques that you notice? Or
I mean,
you said you're flustered about it. I don't know if you use the word flustered, but you're like,
yes. I didn't know the stuff about the slam, but I knew early on that slam wasn't for me. Like, so I knew I just wasn't that slam poet. I grew up loving Stacey Ann Chen. That was like my inspiration. Stacey Ann Chen. So she was my inspiration for all writing at one point, and I was like, I'm going to be the next Stacey Ann Chen. I'm never going to be Stacey Ann Chen. Only Stacey Ann Chen can be Stacey Ann Chen. But like, that was like, she was my obsession for a bit of time. And I got to New Weekend, and I was too chicken to ever try to slam because I knew my writing wasn't there. But I did like there was always like the open mic after the slam. So that was my first like performance at New Weekend, was the open mic when everyone was already gone and there was like 5 people left in the room. And that's when I performed. That was my first.
Was your first performance space?
That was probably, I think that was in New York. Yeah. And that was my first real one, I want to say. There were some other like smaller ones that friends got me into. I did do Bowery, but that's because I was doing urban erotica. But even before I got to urban erotica, I went to try to do urban erotica. Guy did not know me, sight unseen, brought me into his family's coffee shop in Brooklyn. And so I was performing there with him. And this is like early 2000s, like 2004. Let's see, my sister may or may not have been alive by then. So we're either talking about like 2003, 2004. By the time she was going in 2005, I started performing exclusively at open mic my friend was starting. And then I injured myself there and I stopped. and so I was like, and I'm done, because it was my first physical injury where I quite literally walked through the floor. My foot went ankle deep into the concrete. And that was the end of all of it. Because I was just practicing. That was where I was getting my confidence up. And then I was like, and we're done. And I stopped. And I started a little bit again in like I got into urban erotica in 2009, 2010. And my confidence wasn't up. So when Mo Beasley gave me advice on performance or on my writing, I wasn't ready for it. So I shut down because my ego wasn't ready. So I shut down and I stopped. And then I wrote the book and I was like, oh crap. Ain't nobody gonna know who I am if I'm not actually on stages.
Yeah.
And so that's when I got connected to that other group that performed in that same space. And I have completely disowned them, and I will never perform with them ever again, as long as the person in charge is in charge. So
Yes.
yes,
Sports
that
writers think they're
huh?
I said sports writers who think they're poets.
And who are closet racists. So
Yeah.
you know,
Oh yeah.
so that they said they wrote the one thing that was enough, and that was enough, and I just can't. They have a history of it, and I just couldn't do it anymore. So as the community poet, doesn't really land right to be affiliated with someone who co-signed bad mouthing the victims of Rittenhouse's victims, like
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I can show you the screenshot later.
Yeah.
Because I do have the proof. So that all said, after that that was with them for 6 years, and so I stopped, and that was my hiatus from performing. So I haven't been performing a lot since then, because finding the safe space, that's when I started getting more selective, because I was like, I'm not just showing up everywhere. I don't need to just show up everywhere. Some places are going to pay me to show up, so let me go to the places that are going to pay me to show up. I'm also happy to go to free places, but there's still a pandemic. I'm not trying to go to a free place to get your COVID.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm gonna be real careful about where I'm showing up, So but like for clicks wise, it's not even it's it's funny because I'm a Bronx I'm from the Bronx. I'm born and raised. Like I live here. You will probably spread my ashes here. Like that's what my poem even says, right? Like, and it's funny because I'm terrified of fire, but like cremate me. You don't need to come visit my body anywhere. Like just like do whatever. I don't care where I'm going. But like I cannot break into the Bronx properly for some reason. And I think it's partially because I'm not going to go to the South Bronx, but I'm also not I'm not your pseudo slamish person. So it's hard and there's some clickiness happening here that I just I'm not about that life. So I show up where I'm respected. I show up where family is. And one day the Bronx is going to recognize me and they're going to appreciate me. But right now it's not happening. And that's also fine, but it's a very weird thing happening here. Like people know me, but also people don't know who I am. It's a weird thing happening here. But like I was just on a panel in the UK last weekend. So how does it happen? Like, the world knows me, but then again, they said about Jesus that he couldn't get respect in his own home. So there's also that. So there's weird things that like there's still the weird clickiness, there's still the weird things, there's still weird movement that happens, but you create your own community. And because I'm again Gen X, still learned how to live on my own. I'm a loner. I still move on my own. So just like Hattress, the one thing I love about Hattress, everybody knows Hattress, but if you really watch Hattress moves on his own. He ain't really part of any clique. He just shows up wherever he wants to. And that's kind of how I move too, right? Like everybody knows me who knows me, but I'm not really part of any particular crew. I'm just going to show up when I show up. And you'd be like, oh, word, Dara's here. And I'm going to sit in my corner until it's time for me to perform. And they'd be like, yo, Dara was really here. And then I go sit in the corner again and you don't know I was even doing anything because that's who I am. So this is going long. I'm sorry, but this is a great, amazing conversation. This is an amazing conversation. I'm really glad that we're having it. I like to ask this question, even though you sort of said it. Hopefully it's a short answer because I still want to hear I have two other questions for you. So it's like, but okay. Is there a fun fact about yourself you can share? You did just say you have your MFA. Is it MFA or is it? Okay. So that may be the fun fact, that may not be it, but is there a fun fact you want to share? Are you a Star Wars fan? Is that what you also just said to us?
Yeah, fun fact, I play with Legos, Star Wars Legos, so for anxiety purposes and stuff. So there's my fun fact.
Do you like build stuff or do you just play with Legos?
No, I build them. Yeah, I build them, yes.
Okay. See, now that's really cool. I'm really excited by this information now. See, now you're part of the Lego community. That's
Yes.
another community that you didn't know.
Yeah, I am part of like you're right about that. Yeah.
See, there's like I have a lot of friends who are like into the Legos hardcore, like just so you know. So super dope. Um, what would you want people who are not part of the poetry community to, how would you want them to support the community? Like what would they need to know? Like how would they support the poetry community
Wow.
or poets?
I mean, I guess just how, I mean, obviously buying books and stuff like that, but not, I guess, just engaging and maybe, you know, opening yourself up to a new experience. You know, like um, if you're going to open yourself up to a comedian, an actor, or a theater actor, like, you know, why not a poet? Why not open yourself up? Because it is an avant-garde medium. It's something that requires self-reflection, especially if you're reading poetry. You know, reading, I can't just read a poem once. I gotta read it a few times. I gotta find it. You know, having that, I guess, that patience to let it in, to let it access you, is what I would like to see people outside of the community do to embrace that. Because to me, there's so much poetry that's happening on TV shows, on, like, you don't even realize it, like the dialogue. Um, and I feel like if you can accept that, you can accept words in all its forms. So I guess that's what I got.
No, it's true. I think I was thinking about this before. When I'm a vendor and I'm at like events and I'm trying to sell my books, I often start with like, well, do you like poetry? And depending what their answer is, I dictates which way I go next. Because if the answer is yes, I was like, hey, great, I have books of poetry for you. But the answer is no, I ask why, and it's usually like Shakespeare. It's usually the old dead white guys that made it hard to understand. It's the old English, it's the T.S. Eliot's of the world that people are just like, what is happening in this? Why is smoke crawling against the wall? Like, I don't understand what's happening. Like they don't want to spend the time. And then I go, great, open the book, read any poem and tell me, can you understand what's happening? And I just try to get them to see that it's not as scary as they once thought it was. And I think a lot of people I think poetry, and my hat's off to you, because we didn't talk about this. So we may just have to do another episode at some point where you're talking on behalf of the educator community, even though you didn't want to own that. Because I think the problem is that poetry is often taught incorrectly. It's taught in a way that feels like torture. And so few people they like, I hated the sonnet section. As a theater major, we had to do Shakespeare, but I hated the sonnet section of that workshop, of that class. And even though I could break down a sonnet if you make me have to do it, because I also did Shakespeare theater as an adult, in like, it was a community theater that I worked at, that we made Shakespeare accessible to regular people, but we still use the language. So I can pretend to do it if I have to simultaneously. Don't make me read a Shakespeare sonnet. I don't want to do it. Like, I just have no interest in doing it. I don't like sonnets as a general rule, because iambic pentameter is like, any meter makes me want to stab my eyes out. Like, but I think all poets need to know the stuff. I think we all need to know it. Maybe never use it if you don't want to, but we need to know it. So that we can say iambic pentameter and know what that means. You know, we need to be able to say those things. But I think like people get so intimidated by those things, or by the old ways in which poetry was measured. And I think that's where the gatekeeping comes by too. Like, it's all where we measure stuff by. So that when I'm teaching poetry, when I'm teaching poetic forms, I use different cultural forms. I use old white forms, but then I go find a Malaysian form, and I go find an African American form, and I go find an Indian form, so that we are tapping into different cultures and identifying that like there's different ways in which poetry exists. Because I think people are so caught up on the bad ways in which we taught it that they're so terrified of it. So I co-sign you on that one.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, just to add to that, I think it's again about finding access points. Like teach, to get away from the old white man ideology of teaching poetry. Um, um, like I teach a class right now at Wagner, the students I'm teaching Wagner College aren't, there are some of them are theater majors, some of them are psychology majors. Like they're not in, they're not going to be going. Poetry is not going to be their career. Maybe it'll be a hobby or something of theirs. But like I have one class, it's called Pop Culture, Comic Books, and Poetry, and it's all
Mm.
poetry based on things happening in pop culture, comic books, poems about Pac-Man, poems about
Ooh.
Ariana Grande, like things that will get you to think in a different way about a subject and also learn this thing called poetry. And I think people forget that it needs to be this, this like the meter, the smoke crawling up the wall, like it doesn't have to be this cryptic mythic thing. It could also, just be about Care Bears, and that's important. That's so important. And then from there, you can definitely add some of that other technical aspect, try other things, go for the poets of the 1800s. I think, Baudelaire and all those French, I think those are still important poets to teach, but it can't be the only thing. If that's all you're doing, I think just like you said, like that person who's looking at your book is like, it just never, it felt too hard. I think you want to get to the too hard. You don't want to start with the too hard. And I think that's like what you're saying. People start with the too hard.
Yeah. So I have another question, and then I want to hear poems, but like I just I'm just loving this conversation so much. I'm like, I don't want it to end. What advice do you have for poets?
Oh God, don't listen to me. That would be the first thing. But I mean, it really depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, what you're, my advice is to really be yourself. Like, I say that to my students too. It has to be your voice. Don't try, the first few times you're going to try to write a poem. Once you get out of that space where you're not like, I'm writing a poem, you're just writing. Because to me, the editing or taking that, like I'm someone who writes in a book first. Sometimes I will type it out first, but for the most part, it's got to happen in the book first. And then what am I going to take from that to start writing this poem? Or like I think if you keep, I'm going to write a poem, I think that can be detrimental to you. I think right now, though, I wish I was more social media savvy. But if you're looking to make poetry a career, besides the traditional ways, I think social media is really the way to go about that. I know people who have gotten book deals from big presses because of having a good social media game.
Mm.
And if that's a journey you want to go on, it's interesting. We're living in this world now where actors are like, oh, it's easy to be an actor now because so many people can do it. So it's less money and less you being on top of the mountain. Same thing with musicians. Those popular musicians who are making millions are now making hundreds of thousands, and they're complaining because they're not making millions. But those musicians who are underground are making money and are being known more and getting their work out there more, which I think is the most important part about it. And right now, same thing with the poetry scene. Like, oh, you're not doing it this way, and you're doing it another way. That I don't know if it's an easier way, but it may take less time to get to that mountaintop, and I think
Mm.
that's fine. So I think it's about finding out what it is you want from poetry. If you want that, that I don't want to say fame, but that status or being able to make it a full-time job, I think social media right now is the way to go. But I think just with writing it, letting your voice shine out, finding that uniqueness in yourself, but also making sure that who you are, like I don't know about you, but if I'm having a conversation with someone and a line, like there are so many lines from conversations that come out, and they're just as important as trying to write that poetic line. Because when you're in a conversation with someone, I mean, your guard is up, but also you're letting things. There's a vulnerability that's happening. I I just taught this workshop, and I think vulnerability is part of it too. Being able to be vulnerable, no matter what kind of poetry you write. I think writing a deep, sad poem, you have to be vulnerable, and writing a ridiculous, funny poem, you have to be vulnerable too, because they elicit two different. Like I think when you write something fun, like a comedian, for an audience to laugh, the audience has to be vulnerable, because a laugh is so instantaneous. Same thing with funny poetry. When you hear that instantaneous laugh, you're laughing, but then you have to process why you laughed at it. And I think that's part of vulnerability. So I think that's the advice I would give. Sorry it took so long to get there, but being vulnerable, allowing yourself to open up, and to write that sad poem, but to also write that poem about the rhinoceros who's wearing a sweater, who's at the checkout counter at Target. If you're not writing that poem too, and you're not opening yourself up to write that poem, then you're just writing sad poetry, and after a while that just gets quite trite. There you go. That was a long, long answer to that.
It was a terrific answer. I love your answers.
And your supportiveness during the
So, last two questions. Okay, seriously, the last two questions. So one, how can people support and follow you?
I am you wouldn't know it from social media, because I post a lot of events on there that I'm a part of. But I'm very bad at promoting me, like selling my book. I don't know how to do any of that shit. I hate things like AWP. That makes my fucking anxiety. Like I didn't even go to the last one. But it's very difficult. But if you want to, just at Thomas Fucaloro on Instagram. I do have. I guess I will say this, from Finishing Line Press. I do have a chapbook coming out in August. You can pre-order, called "The Only Gardening I Do Is When I Give Up," which I'm really happy about, because it's actually based on. Wait, you didn't ask that question about what it's based on, so I'm not going to say. Yeah, those are the places you could find me. Just I'm answering questions that you didn't ask me about. But yeah, at Thomas Fucaloro on Instagram, Thomas Fucaloro on Facebook. I'm always promoting things on there, but you can check Finishing Line Press too, for that chapbook that's coming out.
That's super dope. So, you're a poet. Do you have a poem that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, so I went into the vault. I actually picked out this from an old book from 2010. I want to say, no, 2014, I'm lying. It starts from the belly and blooms. And I knew we were going to be talking about Staten Island and poetry. Maybe some of the phrasing in here is a little dated, I think. But I think it works for the conversation about Staten Island, poets, community, and all of that jazz. And education, too. It's hard to tell the students from the madmen. Part 1. We are 70% water and 30% fucked up. It's that fucked upness that dictates who you are. It's a crown of grit prone to be sewn to the head like a cabbage of hair. The ocean inside all of us is only as useful as who we let drown in it. The sun is always shining much brighter in my head. I see with my looks and I mind with my eyes. The often heartbeat cellos a bow across the wrinkles of your forehead to a tune only found in mental patients on heavy medication, dripping drool, the only words that pour from their mouths. In Staten Island once stood the Willowbrook Mental Institution, regenerating impulses of normalcy into a pulse migrating to its own hum. Medicated intravenous introverts roaming the halls of this once proud institution, laughing all the way to the other side of the room. Now the Willowbrook Mental Institution has been torn down, and out from its ashes now stands the College of Staten Island, regenerating pulses of normalcy into an impulse to migrate into itself. Medicated poet adolescent introverts roaming the halls of this now proud institution, learning all the way to the window. Pills inspire as well as medicate. Books inspire as well as medicate. Learning institutions are the new mental hospitals. We are 30% water and 70% fucked up and 100% everywhere. Part 2. Every day is a reason to get fucked up. I was waiting for the number 59 bus to go to the College of Staten Island. The Seaview Mental Hospital bus stopped instead. It wasn't my bus, but you could understand why it would want to stop for me. It's hard to tell the poets from the madmen. When a wrist can produce pen, produce light, they always want to put you away, just in case you are its source.
Wow. Wow.
Thanks.
See, this is why, now you understand why I was like, yeah, not mid-level. But
I'm very mid-level.
but once you just define what mid-level was, I agree with you. Poetic skill-wise, different conversation.
Thank you for your kindness and your support and your nice, just generous words. I appreciate that.
I'm just honest. Like, there's a reason why so many people are your fans. Whether you know it or not, whether you own it or not, that's fine. You don't have to. We're still sitting here going like, but Thomas, do you know about Tom? Okay, Thomas. So, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you for joining me on behalf of, and we're gonna have to have more conversations, period.
Whenever you're ready, I'm down.